This meeting is being recorded.
All right.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Coca-Cola Company Supplier Development Institute monthly webinar series. It is October 2018. Hope everyone is enjoying the fall weather. Today, we've got a special treat in store for you. We're going to be talking about human resource management. So let me just talk about how we're going to move through for those of you that are new to our webinar. If we go to the next screen, Mark, we're going to be recording the training today. And so as a result, you will be able to go back if you missed something or if you want to share it with someone else. You'll be able to find the recorded session at our Coca-Cola Fellows website, which is tccfellows2018.com, and it will be in the blog post area. Other webinars that we have done will also be there. So our agenda today, we'll do a quick welcome and introductions. We'll talk about the guidelines that we have for today, and then we'll get right into talking about human resources and what you need to do as a supervisor or as an owner of a business when it comes to people. Remember, it's people, processes, and performance. And without people, we cannot have a process to result in performance. We will also tell you where to find the evaluation to talk about the webinar and give us some feedback, and then we'll wrap it up. So our guidelines for today is not to be afraid to ask questions. We want you to participate because the interaction that we have with you makes the webinar a little bit more informative. We want you to open your mind to learning something new, even if you have been supervising or managing teams for a long time. I'm sure that you're going to gain some additional knowledge today. The way you ask questions is through the chat box. There's a chat box at the bottom, and I will be monitoring that chat box, and that way I can interrupt our speaker if you have a particular question. So all you have to do is locate the box at the bottom of the screen and then type in your message as it shows on the next slide. And you type that in, and I'll see that, and then I'll be able to, on your behalf, ask the question for our speaker. All phone lines are going to be muted during the presentation so that we don't have any feedback, we don't get any voices in the background. When you finish, again, we want you to give us your feedback so that you can tell us what's going on with the webinar and how you felt about that. Every once in a while, we'll have an evaluation poll that pops up at the end. I don't think we're having that today, but it's a quick feedback that you'll be able to find on the TC Fellows website that I talked about earlier. So let's do some introductions. First of all, my name is Kathy Martin. If you've been on these webinars in the past, you know that I'm the project leader for the Fellows Institute for Coca-Cola for 2018, and I am the owner of Cafe Martin Solutions, LLC. I have been working with our business coach, who is Mark Parham. He is the Director of Entrepreneurship with the Urban League of Greater Atlanta. The Coca-Cola Company has partnered with the Urban League of Greater Atlanta to bring the Supplier Institute to the fellows that have been selected. And for those of you that are participating as employees, that's the partnership that brings all this to you. In addition to our project management team, we have an executive coach. Her name is Dr. Nicole LaBeach. She is a senior organizational development consultant and leader with Volition Enterprise, Inc. She helps the senior executives, the COOs, and the owners of the company go through different feedback sessions regarding their performance as leaders and owners of the companies that we are working with. So today's presenter, I'm so happy to introduce to you Cherie Knowles. She is the founder of HR Knowledge Source, HRKS, which is a human resources and talent management firm. And she is also a managing partner with Human Capital Consulting Consortium. Cherie is an accomplished practitioner who has achieved and managed to achieve multiple certifications and designations throughout her career. She is highly regarded in the world of business as a leader, as a dynamic facilitator, and a professional speaker. She is going to be talking to us today about hiring and keeping the right people, the keys to the business success. So I'm going to mute my microphone right now, and I'm going to turn it over to Cherie. She's going to tell you a little bit about who she is and what she's about, and we're in for a treat. So have your notepads ready. Make sure you're ready to listen and learn some new things. So Cherie, it's all on you. Welcome.
All right.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, alrighty. So Kathy and Mark, first, thank you very much for asking me to speak on something that is truly near and dear to my heart, which is human resources. I will give you a very brief background on myself. I am first and foremost a wife, a mother, and I fancy myself as a runner. 20 years of human resources experience, and I'm what I call an employee turned entrepreneur. So about 5 years ago, after being corporately attached for 20 plus years, I decided to step out there and start a human resources consulting firm. And I started what we affectionately call HRKS, or HR Knowledge Source. I was having such a great time doing that I then said, why not start another one? So with a partner, I started the Human Capital Consultants Consortium, or we call that H3C. Throughout my career, I have been in every HR role you can possibly think of, from talent management to employee relations to working with companies that have unions. I am since a certified civil treatment facilitator with Eli, an emotional intelligence coach and certified professional. I'm also a certified facilitator for Facebook and a certified project manager. I do a lot of speaking and training and presentations, most recently at Disrupt HR Atlanta. I've spoken with the Project Management Institute group, as well as several human resources organizations and business workshops such as this one through the Urban League and other business expos.
You have the mouse.
I do. Okay, so let's see if it's, okay, it's taken a minute. There we go. Sorry about that. Just a quick overview about HRKS. We started 5 years ago next week, actually, and we're a faith-based HR consulting firm. And what we do, generally speaking, is we provide two separate platforms to small to business, medium-sized business organizations. Day-to-day HR consulting, where companies will outsource their HR practice completely to us, and we serve as their HR consulting team. Generally, these are companies that don't need a full-time human resources executive. We also work with HR departments that are established within companies to help them with HR projects such as compensation or recruitment, leadership development and training. To the right, you'll see just a sample of our clients that include the Land Bank Authority, Facebook, as I mentioned before, Life University, as well as some nonprofits and governmental agencies. My next company that we started is called Human Resources Capital Consortium, and it is H3C for short. I'm moving there we go, mouse. We are a consultancy firm specifically created for government agencies. We are women-owned certified. We recently, this year, received our DBE MBE certification through the Georgia Department of Transportation. In what we do is generally work with these agencies to provide HR projects. We're currently working on a training, design, and delivery curriculum. We work on compensation management as well as recruitment. And my partner is a certified EEOC investigator, so we also provide third-party investigations. Again, to the right, these are just a small list of our clients: the CDC, the USDA, as well as the quasi-government organizations too, including the Georgia World Congress Center. I'm going to set the tone for our time together. We're going to really cover the 5 core topics as it relates to managing your human resources assets or your human capital: attracting, hiring, keeping, managing, and when necessary, exiting from the organization. I want to start with this. As business owners or leaders within a business, the most important thing that you really want to have is success for your company, right? So you want to have performance in terms of organizational performance, growth. You want to have a great reputation or a brand within your respected industry, and then obviously you want to attract and retain customers. My premise to you is that the business case surrounding this related to employees, your employees touch every aspect of your business. They are either helping you grow your organization or helping detract from the growth of the organization. They are helping with your organization's reputation and brand in a positive way or not. They are interacting with your customers and creating an unparalleled customer experience or a memorable customer interaction that's not favorable. And then that leads into really the overall performance of your organization and how you're growing or moving forward. So employees touch every aspect, which is why human resources is such an important factor in your company. A couple of things I want to talk about, starting with the attraction. There is a true war for talent out there. Several years ago, we had the luxury as employers of being able to hire anyone we wanted, because there were a lot of people who were either being right-sized, downsized, or shifted out of an organization, and the talent market was great. There is a shift happening. So it is now a buyer's market for the candidates. They are now consumers. And they truly are looking for organizations that offer more than a competitive salary. They're looking for experience. They're looking for learning opportunities, growth opportunities. They are looking for companies who have great reputations, who maybe do something meaningful in their communities. So they're looking for far more than money. And that's an important thing for you to know when you are recruiting for talent. The other thing I want to mention, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with this or not, but there is something that is happening these days called the ghosting phenomena. And it is when you reach out to candidates, you've scheduled phone interviews or in-person interviews, and they just don't show up. They go ghost on you. Part of this is because they have a lot of different options when it comes to interviewing, comes to employment opportunities, and they just don't respond. And so I want to bring that to your attention so that you know, generally it may not just be your company that's experiencing it, but it is truly happening across multiple industries, multiple candidates. The best thing to do in situations like this is over communicate with the candidate. Confirm, double confirm, triple confirm that they are coming to the interview and that you are very interested in having these discussions with them. The next point I want to bring up is around your unique selling proposition. So as an organization, we all have to think about what's our unique differentiator in the marketplace. So what are we selling? So we're either selling a service or selling a some cases, we're selling the talent. What is your unique recruiting proposition? What's your employment brand? What are employees saying about you in the market, ex-employees and current employees? And what is your recruitment elevator pitch? We all have an elevator pitch for our businesses, but do you have one for candidates so that they can understand very quickly who you are, what you believe in terms of mission, vision, and values, and what you offer to the marketplace? So what's your USP from a recruitment standpoint? Going right into that is your competitive and compelling employment edge. What's trending in your industry? Do you know what your competitors are offering? How do you stack up? How do you compete, whether it's on salary, benefits, other perks, opportunities to work in the community, as an example? What are your competitors doing and how do you stack up? So what's your CCEE, your competitive and compelling employment edge? Sometimes we, in our excitement to hire a candidate, we just go for the best candidate that we find in that moment. And I will say that hiring right the first time is a critical aspect of bringing in the right people and hopefully keeping them engaged in your organization. Studies show that the cost of a bad hire can be up to 4 to 5 times someone's salary. And that includes the time you spend looking for these candidates, the time you spend courting and recruiting these candidates, as well as onboarding and training. If you hire the wrong candidate and they're not a long-term person for your organization, you have just wasted a lot of time, talent, and resources. So when you think about recruitment, the first thing to think, do I build or do I buy? Do you have talent inside the organization that you could groom and train? That's build. Can you move them into the role you're trying to fill? Or truly, do you have such a unique opportunity that no one in the organization is available or ready to be moved into that role? And then you go to the market to buy that talent. That's a question that you ask yourself. The other thing you should ask yourself in terms of recruitment, am I going to be a passive or active recruitment? Passive meaning, do I post a job, let's say it's on LinkedIn or Indeed or Career Builder, and do you just sit back and you wait for the candidates to come to you? Or do you take a more proactive approach where you say, I know the role I'm trying to fill, I know the skill sets, I'm going to go out and actively search for or source, procure talent who might fit my opening. If you do it the latter way, it gives you far more control over the candidate pool and the types of candidates that you have in that pool. The next section is around selection. How are you selecting candidates? Are you hiring for technical skills and fit, or one or the other? I would offer to you that hiring for both will give you the most optimum candidate as well as then turn into the most optimum employee. So skills meaning, can they do the job? Fit meaning, how will they interact not only with the company overall, but with the team that you're hiring for? There are options for online assessments. There are many, many assessments out there that you could choose from that will give you just some additional perspective about the candidates. You could test for technical capacity like Microsoft Word or Excel. You could test for personality. That might be the Myers-Briggs or the DISC or the Hogan, or there are so many out there, but you may want to look at online assessments to give you some additional data around each candidate. Interview techniques are incredibly important. We will always recommend that you use behavioral interviewing questions that will gauge how the person has performed that duty or completed that particular task in the past. Employees are really smart, or candidates are really smart. They bring their best selves to interviews, so you get to meet their representative, right? These questions will help you dig a little deeper to understand that they actually have the skills and ability to perform the job that you're hiring for. And most of us are aware that there are questions that we have to avoid. Anything that's related to race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, parental status, things of that nature are questions that you should absolutely avoid. So if you stick to behavioral interviewing questions, which might mean, tell me about a time that you performed this task, or describe something that you've done in the past. If you use those types of questions, then you will avoid those legal landmines that might get you into hot water. Last but not least, when it comes to selection, I encourage you to be mindful of unconscious bias. And how that shows up in an interview process could be where someone went to a college that you are a fan of. Maybe you went there. Maybe you love the football team. All of a sudden, that person is a great candidate without you really testing whether or not they have the right skills, aptitude, and ability. Or maybe conversely, the person is an older candidate and the folks on your team may be of a different generation. And so immediately you say, there might not be a good fit, again, without testing and asking about their skills, knowledge, and ability. So those are just some areas to be mindful of. We all have unconscious biases, but being aware of them will help you throughout the interview process. Last but not least, when it comes to hiring right the first time, is to creating a phenomenal onboarding employee experience. Nothing is worse than an employee showing up on day one and not feeling like someone expected them to be there. So making sure that you've got a plan for them on day one, week one, helping them understand where things are, who they need to meet with, what the landscape looks like, and really setting them up for success, giving them the tools that they need to do their job. And then we recommend a 90-day success plan, just outlining what you expect the new employee to do, what you expect them to learn, and things you expect them to deliver over that 90 days. So at the end of the 90-day period, you can sit down with them and talk about their accomplishments and their progress to date.
Cherie?
Yes.
I have a question. On the recruitment, you talked about build versus buy. So our fellows are working with Dr. Nicole about organizational development. So to think about build versus buy, I guess it's really more of a comment / question. Don't you also have to have succession plans within your organization so that you can figure out where there are gaps? And if so, how do you go about doing that?
Absolutely. And so that starts with workforce planning, which you should be doing before you even start recruiting, right? So you are working with Dr. Nicole to think about the organizational structure and the different types of roles that you need to support that structure. Then you figure out, okay, that's this position or a director position or an analyst position. Then you determine, now that I have the structure outlined, I know what the roles are, I know what the competencies are for the role, I've got this position in mind, so here's my opening. Now, do I build, do I buy, do I look within my organization and see who I can move into that spot, or do I really have to truly go outside of my organization to fill that role? But all of that starts on the front end with workforce planning.
Thank you very much for answering that.
Oh, you're welcome. Great question. I'm moving. Mark, I may be stuck here because it's not moving. Okay, thank you. Once you have an established employee base, another aspect of HR to consider is compliance. So a lot of times when I'm working with small to medium-sized business owners, we run into these 4 or 5 top issues. Understanding what the employment regulations are for their size organization, differentiating that from best practices. So there are regulations that are legal in nature that you have to comply with, but then there are also best practices that make your workforce a great place to be. Do I have W-2 employees versus 1099 employment contractors? That comes up a lot. And generally, smaller organizations tend to bring people in as 1099s versus W-2 employees. And you really don't have that luxury to make that call. The IRS actually dictates the role or the classification. And from my experience working with small to medium-sized business owners, 9 times out of 10, they should be W-2 employees versus 1099 contractors. But again, the IRS has a list of criteria that you can use to make that decision. The other area that I frequently have conversations and coaching around is whether someone is hourly versus salaried. Generally speaking, that's non-exempt versus exempt. And the Fair Labor Standards Act drives all of that. So it's not up to the employer or the leader to make that call. There is a criteria for that as well that's published by the Department of Labor. So whether someone is designated as non-exempt, typically means hourly, or exempt, which typically means salary. So that's another area that we discuss. Then you've got your general regulations around the policies, your employment handbook. If you don't have one, you need one. Even if you have 2 employees, you absolutely need one. Employment posters that have to be posted in visible, conspicuous places in your organization. Any other policies or regulatory requirements need to be included and shared with employees. So that could be around HIPAA, it could be around a lot of different things, the ADA. Then we look at your personnel files. If you don't have an employment file or a personnel file on your employees, you should start that soon. I-9. Certain organizations are required at a certain level to start to comply with E-Verify, and that includes the I-9 documentation. So these are just some examples of areas that you really have to consider from a compliance standpoint. And I just call it the alphabet soup, because as a small business owner, you can get really lost in all of these acronyms and trying to figure out which ones apply to you and what they mean. But these are things to consider from a compliance standpoint. The next one is keeping good people. So we talked about how to get them. We talked about the structure in terms of compliance. Now let's talk about how to keep them. Engagement and retention is incredibly important. The Gallup, as you see to the left with this graphic, did a survey, and they do one every year, but the survey results said that more than 70% of the employees in your organization fall in the not engaged or actively disengaged quadrant. So what that means is you've got people in your organization that might be sitting on the fence in terms of whether or not they feel loyal to your organization, emotionally invested and connected. You've got a small subset of people in your organization potentially that are actively disengaged, meaning that they are doing things that are contradictory to your values, to your processes, to your interactions with your customer. And that is something that you really need to be mindful of. How do you change the not engaged to move them into engaged? It's all about the employee experience. A lot of times we focus on the customer experience, and I would challenge that looking at your employees as internal customers. As I mentioned at the beginning of the session, it goes well beyond pay. It has to do with the culture of your organization, what you value, what you say, do you walk the talk in terms of values and your mission and vision, how you communicate good things, and keeping them aware of things that are not working well, so being fully transparent, how you recognize and reward people, again, going beyond just a paycheck. Sometimes I hear employers say, getting a paycheck should be enough. And I will just challenge you and push that and say, it's not enough. And if the employees stay and they're not engaged, it will do far more harm to your organization than you can probably imagine. Another way to keep them engaged and to continue with this idea of the employer experience is offering benefits. Smaller to medium-sized organizations may not have the luxury, right, of being able to pay 80% of healthcare in some cases that larger employers can do. But there are plenty of other options that you can offer employees that they may pay for, but it just enhances the experience of working for your company. A small employer investment will have a huge ROI on engagement and retention. How do you manage for great performance? There's a term that I love called discretionary performance, and at its basic core, what it means is I, as your employee, I wake up every day and at my discretion, I choose how hard I'm going to work on that given day, in that given moment. Right? So I choose how much performance I am going to give you based on how I feel about how you've treated me, based on how my supervisor has engaged with me, based on how I feel about the workforce and the environment in general. Your leader is to drive for high discretionary performance. You do that by setting clear duties, providing job descriptions, giving people goals around what you expect from them. It's not enough to say, oh, they know their job and they can do, they know what to do. People don't always know that. And so it will help you to give them clear, specific instructions. And that comes in the form of a job description or annual performance goals. Providing periodic feedback. People like to know how well they're doing, and they also want to have a chance to course correct if they're not meeting expectations. How do you reward and recognize your employees? Do you provide annual merit increases? Do you provide, maybe it's quarterly or annual incentives in terms of a bonus? Maybe it's spot bonuses. Maybe it's public or recognition in terms of, employee of the month. So there could be some non-monetary rewards and recognition as far as giving feedback and acknowledging people and thanking them. Do you give them stretch goals? People like to grow. Employee surveys show that they don't want to be in a role where they're stuck in a role for 10, 20 years without some level of growth and movement. So do you offer that? Can you give them stretch assignments? What about training outside or inside the organization? The other thing that sometimes we don't do as companies in general, we don't focus on employee strengths. We spend a lot of time trying to fix people. So we focus on, we call it areas of opportunity, weaknesses. We spend a lot of time and interest in supervisory effort trying to fix people. But I would challenge you to focus more on strengths. You can get far more bang for your buck by letting employees do what they do well and do it to the best of their ability. You're only going to get some marginal improvement on fixing people. So my recommendation in terms of performance management is identifying what those strengths are, allowing people to really work in their areas of strength and get far more gain on that than trying to fix them. And last but not least, looking at performance versus demand. There is a capacity threshold for all employees, including you. We will reach maximum saturation, maximum capacity at some point. So if you look to the graphic to the right, performance is one axis, demand is another axis. So when you have low performance and low demand, meaning you're not asking very much of the employee and they don't give very much, then you're going to be in that boredom section, right? And so as you move up there, employee performance increases, your demand on them in terms of giving them more to do, requiring more of them, at some point reaches maximum capacity, and that's that optimum performance level. So again, they're giving great discretionary performance, their performance is going well, and you've increased what you've asked them to do. That's in the green. If you ask your top performers continuously to do more, to keep piling on more, at some point you're going to go into the negative. It's going to feel like they're overloaded, they're drinking out of a fire hose, they're overwhelmed, they become anxious, and at some point employees reach maximum burnout. And I would say be very mindful of this, because it's easy to give our star performers a lot of things to do because they just get it done. Be watchful, because they could reach burnout, and you don't want that either.
So Cherie, how do you, back on that screen, how do you celebrate the successes that your high performers have without showing partiality to those that are not performing? In other words, how do you do it in such a way that those that are either in burnout or bored become enticed or engaged to perform better?
So you start, and that's a fantastic question too, by the way. You start with setting, this is our goal. So let's say, I'm making this up, let's say you've got a sales team and there is an overriding sales goal. So each salesperson has their own individual goal, but it all rolls up to a top line goal, sales goal. You make it clear that this is what we are marching toward. This is our designated spot. And you then can acknowledge and reward people who are making great strides toward that overall goal. It should not make the people who are not performing well feel bad to the point where they just shut down. What it hopefully will do is inspire and light a fire under them so that they will continue to move toward that goal. So if you set a group overall goal for the team, for the group, and then you reward and recognize people according to the group goal versus their individual goal, that's a great way to kind of get the group to be performing and gelling as a unit.
That's a great response. I appreciate that. It also helps for leaders to make sure that they don't wait until the goal is achieved to reward the employees on the team. That as you reach individual milestones headed toward those goals, that you acknowledge and make whatever reward acknowledgement is necessary at that time to continue that encouragement.
That's absolutely right. When you have people working well and moving in a great direction, the more you recognize them along the way, you're encouraging them to continue that behavior. People who are not moving in the right direction, more frequently you can talk to them, you will help them correct so they can move in the right direction versus getting to the end. That actually leads to this slide about coaching up or coaching out. I have an HR philosophy that you give people an opportunity to fix whatever is not working, but you don't get stuck there as a leader. Sometimes our intention is to help people, and we will over pivot to do that. And then we get in a situation where we are completely fed up with that employee, and now it's time to move them out the organization, and you haven't done truly your due diligence. So one rotten apple will spoil the whole bunch, I have to say. You have an employee who is not performing well. Here's what happens. Productivity overall declines because the people around them are fully aware that this person isn't performing well. They're not pulling their weight, as we say. It becomes noise for your organization. The other people get distracted because they spend a whole lot of time moaning and groaning and talking about the fact that you haven't done anything for this poor performer. So don't think that they don't know that you have a poor performer amongst the bunch, because they do. And it will cause a lot of churn and inefficiency in your organization and in that team. So how do you do it? How do you have those conversations? First and foremost, you can be candid and kind at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. Sometimes leaders will avoid conflict, avoid having those tough conversations simply because they don't want to hurt someone's feelings, or they're not sure how to broach the subject, or they don't want to come off as too hard. But you can be candid, which is direct, and kind, which is respectful at the same time. So let's say you have someone who is not performing well. You give them notice. You put them on notice. You can give them a written warning. You can type a memo. It could be in Word. It could be something as simple as that to say, here is your notice that you're not meeting expectations, and these are the reasons. Here's my expectation for that role, or for you in that role, and here are the reasons or examples that you're not meeting that expectation. I am now giving you, Susie Joe, an opportunity to improve and correct. You have those tough conversations and document the response from the employee. You recap it, and then you now have a plan. We call them PIPs, Performance Improvement Plans, or Progressive Discipline Plans, PDPs. If you get in a situation where you have documented, you've given them an opportunity to correct, and performance still hasn't improved enough to your satisfaction to meet expectations, then you may need to move into exiting them out of the organization. That happens. You want to be a fair witness to all of this, making sure that you're weighing the pros and cons. You also want to have a physical witness in the room when you have a termination meeting. So that could be human resources if you have an HR person or someone else in leadership. And when you are in those conversations, even in performance conversations, before you get to the term, you want to stick to the facts. So don't get into a tit for tat. That's my word. It's not an official word, but that means employees are trying to cast the blame on you because, hey, you didn't do what you were supposed to do, manager. You're not that great. If I had known, et cetera, et cetera. Then we have a tendency or a desire to respond back to it. Don't do that. Just stick to the facts. Keep emotion out as much as possible. Be aware of your triggers because the employees will try to divert the attention from themselves, and they will blame somebody on the team. They may blame you, etc. So be aware of that and be mindful.
That performance improvement plan is the way to do that. I appreciate you mentioning that you document
Yes.
not just what those opportunities were in the progressive discipline process, but you also document what the employee has agreed to do for improvement and what you as a manager or a leader will do to help that employee.
Absolutely.
So that when you get to that termination area, then you have facts to say, well, this is what we agreed upon to do. This was not done, or this was done. So that's how that helps you stick to those facts.
Exactly. And I recommend that during the performance improvement period of time that you meet frequently to do a progress check to see how well they're performing. Don't wait until the end of the PIP. Let's say you put them on a 60-day PIP. Don't wait until you get to the end of the 60 days to say you made it or you didn't make it. Give them feedback along the way. And if you get to a point in time where you see that it is not working and it is not, the likelihood of it is not going to improve, you can call it done then and there. So I don't recommend that you suffer for 60 days either. So I want to also add that. And then this last slide is just really a bit of a recap around what you should have, your must-haves, right, as a business owner or a leader in an organization. You want to make sure that you are following whatever the compliance requirements and regulations are for a company of your size. You want to make sure you have the required posters posted. That includes the legal posters that talk about anti-discrimination and other legal requirements. You want to make sure that you have your OSHA logs posted so that when there is an accident that you are recording it by it's once a year required to post your OSHA logs. You want to make sure that you have your workers' compensation panel posted. And this is, I find that this happens frequently too, where an employee has an accident or an injury on the job, and there is no panel of physicians for workers' comp posted. And they end up going to either their own doctor or urgent care. If you have workers' comp insurance, which you should, then you run the risk of getting into a situation where now you're paying for medical expenses that your workers' comp coverage won't abide by. So you want to make sure that when you have workers' comp insurance, you have that panel of physicians posted, and that is where you send people if they have an accident or an injury. I'm also going to deviate for a second and say that depending on the company and your industry, you may also want to send them out for a drug test as well. So having a vendor that you work with that provides drug testing is incredibly important. The next thing to have in your toolkit is a talent management plan, and that includes recruitment. It includes reward and recognition, as we talked about. It includes areas and opportunities to keep people engaged. Maybe you have a quarterly town hall meeting where you have an all-employee meeting, and maybe you bring in lunch, as an example. Maybe you have an employee newsletter that goes out once a quarter where you just keep people engaged. You just keep interacting with them in some way. That's how you manage your talent. Succession planning falls into this as well, identifying people in the org where you need to prep them for the next role up. So having that succession planning. We talked about workforce planning. I know you're working with Dr. Nicole on organizational design and development. All of that rolls into talent management, having a plan around that. Having some opportunity for training and development, incredibly important. So there are things, as an example, sexual harassment and anti-discrimination training is required. That is not something that I would say is the best practice. That's a must-have. If you're not offering something annually to your employees and your leaders on A, what it looks like, B, how to report it, and C, most importantly, the statement that your organization will not tolerate it, you run the risk of being in jeopardy on the back end if you terminate someone or they file a complaint and it's not addressed appropriately. So training and development is huge. If you've got leaders in your organization, I would provide HR 101 training so that they know what to look for, that they feel comfortable addressing issues and having tough conversations and putting people in these tips as we talked about. Employee training, again, is important. So if you are training people today to do the role that they have, you also want to think about training them and giving them skills to do the job that you may need them to do next time, next year, in the next 2 years, etc. Having an employee handbook is really also, I think, critical for your success. It doesn't have to be, a 50-page document with details upon details upon details, but you need a rule book or a roadmap for your employees and your leaders to know what's expected of them in terms of behavior. And this handbook with policies is a great way to do that. I recommend starting with one and then revisiting it every year, making small to major changes, especially if legislation changes or regulations change in the marketplace. Benefits and perks, we talked about this, but I want to re-emphasize that you should have something that you offer your employees. If you can't afford to pay a great deal in terms of your contribution for their health care, offer some other options. Offer, as an example, Colonial Life has voluntary benefits, AFLAC. Those are just some areas that you could add that enhance what you offer that you don't necessarily have to pay for as an employer. Performance management, another must-have. Performance management should not be a one-time-a-year deal, folks. So let me say, along the way throughout the year, this should be a continuous communication process, not just waiting until the end where the annual review is due, and then you lay the hammer down on someone to say where they have not been performing well. People don't like to be caught off guard. They don't like to be blindsided, and it is not a good practice to have. Have those conversations along the way, good and or constructive, so that when you get to the annual cycle, it is truly a summary of everything you've discussed throughout the year, and there are no surprises. If you offer merit increases, whether it's annually or how often you increase people's their pay, if you're paying for performance, my suggestion is to have the conversation around performance first, not in conjunction with here's your raise or your annual merit increase, because if you could combine them together, people aren't listening. All they are doing is holding their breath, waiting to see what you've given them in terms of their merit increase. So separate those conversations if you really want to have meaningful dialogue around performance. We've discussed the performance discipline process. Put something in place, put it in writing, add it to your handbook, and then have templates or tools that you can use that is consistent throughout the organization, so that everyone is using something fairly the same, so that you don't run the risk of having a claim against you of not having fair employment practices. The other thing that's not up here that I would also say is be mindful of retaliation. That's a hot claim this year and last year with the EEOC. So when you've disciplined an employee and then, or someone has made a complaint about something and they feel that now you are treating them a certain sort of way because of the complaint or because of the disciplinary action, you can then be involved in a claim of retaliation. Your managers have to understand very, very carefully and thoroughly that that is not acceptable. We see a lot of complaints around that, and a lot of complaints around whether someone is exempt or non-exempt. And we were talking about that before, understanding those classifications. So being very mindful of those things and having a plan and something in writing. Last but not least, HR support. Obviously, I'm a big proponent of human resources. I spent my life's career helping small to medium-sized employers. Whatever your solution is, whether you outsource it or you bring someone in-house, you need to have human resources support. This would be the person or people who will help you navigate all of these various things I talked about, help you avoid the landmines that might come with navigating this employee base, making sure you're doing the right things by your people at the right time while you run a business. You're running a business, so you focus on that. Have someone help you with the people aspect of it. And I'm going to leave you with these two quotes I love as food for thought. So Jim Collins, who is an author of a book called Good to Great, if you have not read that book, I strongly recommend it. He says, great vision without great people is irrelevant. Simply meaning you can have the best vision, the best product, the best service, the best model for your business, but if you don't have the right people on the bus to help you drive it forward, it's irrelevant. You're not going to grow. You're not going to be successful longer term. Stephen Covey, and most of you are probably familiar with Stephen Covey and his 7 Habits and a lot of different things. He says, always treat your employees exactly as you want them to treat your best customers. And I think that is well said. Treat them the way that you want them to treat your customers. If you do that, then you are truly set up for success longer term. So at this point, we have a little bit less than 10 minutes left. I'm going to pause and just ask Kathy, do we have any additional questions?
We do not, Cherie, but I tell you what, from a summary standpoint, I just want to make a few comments.
Yes.
Thank you so much for such a comprehensive and overall presentation about what is necessary. The fellows that are in this Supplier Institute have organizations that are as small as a handful of people to over 100 people. So it's very, very important that they have paid attention and understood all the things that you've talked about. I know you talked about growing and the reputation and brand and customer experience that's in your employees and how that directly impacts the success of your business.
Yes.
You mentioned about the candidates are also consumers. So as you're recruiting, to make sure that you over communicate to prevent ghosting and that you have an elevator pitch, just like we teach everybody to have one for their business, to have one for their candidates.
Yes.
To think about hiring correctly the first time to avoid that high cost of a bad hire. To think about building versus buying when you're thinking about your organizational design based on the skill sets that you may already have and those that you're trying to obtain. To make sure that you know how to find those IRS guidelines for W-2 versus 1099 employees, because you don't want all your good resources that you have earned in that revenue side to go into lawsuits.
Yes.
To think about the fact that the study said that 70% of your employees are not engaged. I cannot imagine how you can function and be productive if you don't have employees that are involved and engaged. And thinking about how you have that discretionary performance so that you can drive that exceptional performance so that they can be engaged. Having clear goals, making sure that when you're talking about performance, that you're candid and kind. That's what you said, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So having those project checks along the way, I think it's just so very important. And for those that have not been able to attend today live, we are going to reinforce that all of the fellows have the CEOs or their owners listen to this presentation. And then if they have additional questions, comments, or concerns, and if they need help, that they can come to Mark or me or Dr. Nicole, and we can bring you on board to help them do what needs to be done from an HR support plan. So we hope that you're open to that.
Absolutely, it would be my pleasure.
Mark, did you have any comments?
No, I don't. It was a great presentation, and I'll get it out and publish so we can get it to everybody to review.
Well, we're going to put this, as Mark said, he's going to get the recording out and on the website so that people can go back. I'm going to go back and listen to it because I was taking notes and I want to make sure that I got everything that's going to be important for me to share with others. And we want to make sure that after you have listened to this webinar, that you do go and fill out the evaluation form that is on the fellows website to give us feedback specific to this particular webinar. I want to again extend our thanks to Cherie Knowles, who is the founder of HR Knowledge Source and
This meeting is being recorded.